we'll invite the panellists forward. So, as I said, it's really, I guess, in reflecting on some of the topics that Crystal raised and the relative topics in the mental health space. So I'd like to welcome to the panel Kathering Barling, who is a carer consultant at St Vincent's Mental Health, Amelia Berg, who is a Fuse Initiatives project worker at APSU, Corney, who is a senior peer support worker at Ballarat Community Health, and Ritchie, who is a project development officer at Peer Projects at SHARC, and invite Crystal to kind of lead the panel and see where we go.
It's so good to have everybody in the room today and be able to share different perspectives. I think I just wanted to start off before we get any questions coming in the chat. So please, for the rest of participants, fire away your questions to the panel. I wanted to kind of touch on some of the stuff I think Nadia spoke to and some of the others about shared goals and shared visions. I know that we come here with different perspectives, and I'm wondering if anyone on the panel here wants to speak to that, whether we as workforces have shared goals and shared visions and what they might look like. Amelia?
Yeah, I think we really do. We might be coming from, like you said, those different philosophies, so harm reduction or recovery or somewhere in between, or we could be coming from, a mental health focus or a family carer focus. But ultimately what we're working towards, all of us, is the health and wellbeing of our community and our client base. So that might look a bit different from each of those different perspectives, but ultimately we're working towards the same thing. And intersectionality is a massive thing here too, because so often these things, they go hand in hand. So that is really why we need to work together and, continue to help each other to actually move forward and promote lived and living experience work throughout each of our sectors.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to add, it was great the point you made, Crystal, about the continuum as well, and understanding we're there to meet people where they're at and keeping people positively engaged in services and bridging the gap between clients and clinicians. From my experience, and look, it's hard for one of us to say what is our shared vision and goal. Everyone's going to have a different perspective, but from my understanding and experience, I guess understanding the purpose of living and lived experience work and where we fit, emphasising, I guess, role clarity. A quote that I really love is about defining and not defending the work, so that everyone understands the role, or at least working towards understanding the role. And in terms of, I guess, the theme of the forum of coming together, understanding how AOD, mental health, homelessness, gambling harm, as well as, and probably really importantly, carers and family members, how they all interplay with each other, and why it's important to understand how to connect and support people with comorbidities and those supporting those people in their personal life as well. And it's really important that we understand each other. And the more understanding we have for each other and the complexities of each individual, I think the more we can work together.
And can I just add, I think we represent marginalised people in the community, whether you're coming from a mental health or an AOD background. And I think most of us as peer workers work to, break down the stigma and the barriers for people being members of their communities. And, I think, that's just something that, covers all sectors that we work for, and in the family and carer sector as well.
Yeah, I'll just add there, agreement with everything you've said. As a carer consultant, I do a little different work sometimes than the carer peer support workers, because I'm involved in systemic change within the organisation that I work for. So I'm often looking at working with the clinicians and the managers and executive to look at how can we provide our service better and how can we embed lived experience further. So all those discussions that are coming out of the Royal Commission are very much in mind at the moment. So this, for me, rolls into the way that we see some of our best work is to work with our consultant colleagues who are lived experience consumer consultants and us as lived experience carer consultants. So we often find that we can bring issues together and find solutions by working together, by talking about our shared goals, just as you did, Amelia, so well. I completely agreed with how you put that. That was great. And how we can then identify strategies that we can all go away into our different places sometimes to implement all the different conversations that we're in, but also come up with ways we can pass on communications through the networks that we have differently as well. So it really works to work together and to add to that.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks all. I really got from that how important our roles are. You know, Rick talked about how representative we are of various communities and how we bridge the gaps, we remove barriers, and like Amelia said, we're all after the same goal for the people that we work with. We're after health and well-being. And I think what Brendan was pointing to was about the workforce and about how altogether, we want to be recognised, we want to be valued and understood. We want to be, the defining, not defending. It's about, we want to be seen and heard and recognised and valued, rather than kind of fighting for a space. And I think one thing to think about is if we have those shared goals as workforces, how do we work together in reaching those goals? What kind of co-learning can we do? And how do we go from this forum today, which is just such, for me, it feels like, I don't know the word, but it feels like such a highlight in the journey that I've been on in lived experience work. Where to from here for us to collaborate?
In terms of achieving goals, I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of developing a framework around how we'd like each workforce to look in terms of, planning for organisations and then frameworks for sustainability as well. How are we going to sustain this? At the moment, peer work and lived experience work is really exciting. It's really trending. How can we sustain this to make sure it's not a flash in the pan? So identifying, I guess, what's needed in the workforce, what types of supports are needed for lived and living experience workers, who can provide them, where will the money come from, and I guess looking at a trajectory in terms of a shared vision around where do we want the workforce to go? Do we want lived or living experience leadership roles? Lived and living experience workers on boards? Are we looking at trainings? Are trainings accessible for people? Are they affordable for people? So I think that there are a lot of things we're working towards, and I think we've seen a lot of that come into play recently, which is exciting. And I guess it's just about pushing it forward and to keep moving it forward as well.
And I think you could also, when we're talking about the findings of the Royal Commission or the recommendations about the mental health and wellbeing hubs, there's no reason why, the AOD sector couldn't sit in there. I mean, if we're talking about wellbeing, we're talking about a cross-section of, keeping people well in the community. So why wouldn't you have AOD embedded in, the mental health and wellbeing hubs that are going to be dotted around the state? So, I think anything at this point in time is possible. We just have to lobby the powers that be to, sustain and create the vision that we see, at this point in time and turn it into reality.
Definitely. And I think also government, who are primarily our funders, they need to get on board with providing sustainable funding for peer programs because, so often, we lose our workforce because of job insecurity when, it comes to May and you're, fingers crossed that your position is going to get refunded for the following year. People can't live like that. It's unfair. So then, like recently in the living experience workforce, our peers got funded for a 2-year duration instead of 1, and that was amazing. So because over the period of 4 years that we've had, we've lost like 9 peers due to job insecurity. So knowing that, there's that bit more security and that it can be done, we just need that willingness from government to continue to, grow that funding base and to do it in a sustainable way. It's totally possible. And, it's something that needs to be done across all the sectors.
Yeah.
Really, sorry, Catherine.
That's right. I just want to reiterate the transformation plans that are being worked out across many services at the moment point to embedding lived experience as a key priority. In fact, it's the first priority in our plan. However, I think the big transformation is going to come in budgeting, because everything always comes back to budgets. And what I can see is that with it, all of us, certainly the ones I know, we're all part-timers. And in terms of a living wage, like you were saying, Amelia, there's just got to be some allowance for variation in that, and that comes back to funding every time. And I think also the working with each other, the allowance for different workforces to work together. And someone mentioned before communities of practice. I think that will be something that can grow to allow us to unfold things together, to take the time that we need to learn things together and to put in views, suggestions. There's so much rush going on at the moment, it's ridiculous. And it's not allowing the fullness of what we can contribute.
Also, there's that imperative of having, workers not being one out, the only peer or lived or living experience worker in an organisation. That's so isolating. We're social beings. We need that team support. So, at a minimum, positions should be funded in twos at a minimum, so that, you've got that like-minded person in that same thing. You can actually bounce off each other, rather than having people one out. It's, that in itself is dangerous.
And I recently found out there's research behind that actually points to how valuable that is. Like, we know it in our lived experience of it, but there's actually research that already points to it. So we must get hold of that and amplify that.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that coming from an AOD role or perspective myself, we've learned so much from mental health and the experience there. And what we've seen in organisations is a real need to connect the mental health peer workers with the AOD peer workers, because a lot of the time AOD peer workers are working one out or in a very, very small team. And so creating opportunities for the mental health peer workers to engage with the AOD peer workers, whether it's a community of practice or just a co-reflection group, some type of opportunity within paid time, so it's encouraged by the organisation, will allow growth and allow people to learn from each other.
Thanks for all your perspectives on that. I can hear all sorts of things. Thanks for all your perspectives on that. I think it's like really important points to be made. I think too that it's not just about government funding positions, it's about the positions being recognised as crucial, because that's when they get funded. And to go from where the AOD lived experience movement has gone from 0 to 90 positions, given that there's a lot of work still to go, I think it's really important to recognise how far we've come. And I think it's also important to recognise that we're continually part of that conversation of why isn't there AOD lived and living experience in the room. And I think it's really important to recognise those efforts and how far they get us, and that this will continue to grow. So when we have clinicians that are funded in services today that have adequate training and supervision that are appropriate to the role and the policies around the role, and that's because they've been seen as a crucial part of that multidisciplinary team. And we're beginning to, as a lived and living experience workforce, be seen as that, being seen as part of that crucial part and best practice part and normal part of teams in health and wellbeing. I've got a few things in the chat here. There's a little bit about the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health and the funding around that. So AOD will be part, I don't have all the information, but I know that AOD is very much part of the local an area mental health services. There will be an AOD integrated care model. So AOD service delivery will happen from those places and very much part of a statewide service. So there's things happening there. And I saw something as well about language, around some people preferring to talk about perhaps a medicalised language of comorbidity or substance use disorder, and some people like to talk about their drug use as a informed choice and the conflict around that. And I'll hand it back to the panel for this, but I do think that we all identify with different language around our experiences, and what's important is that we ask questions and say what works for you, and put our hand up and say, hang on, this is how I identify myself, just as the LGBTQI plus community does. This is how I identify myself. This is my story. Can I please be heard and seen? Is there anything that you guys wanted to speak to about language?
Language is so powerful and can be really weaponised against people as well. So I think when we talk to improving sort of language within all the various sectors, ask the people themselves, what you consider, appropriate language isn't necessarily what I do. So I was recently involved in some peer research, and I was helping to develop interview schedules. And one of the things that kind of came up for me was in the questions, there was, they were talking about language, talking about like criminal justice involvement, like involvement with police and prisons and whatnot. But it was, I can't even think of what language they used, but it was offender behaviour programs. Now, I understand that that's correctional systems language, but when you're actually working, and the interviews were targeted towards consumers. So, I certainly don't, consider the fact that I did, offender-based programs, because I'm not an offender. I may have offended, but so that was a learning for the researchers, because I was like, oh yeah, no, we don't call it that. Maybe that's what it is, but no one's going to say, oh yeah, yeah, me and my offending behaviour programs and things I did. It's about what's acceptable to the community, and your personal belief may not match with that, but you need to roll with what the community identifies with.
I think that's part of the co-learning, isn't it, Amelia, about, I think co-learning is one of the bigger topics from today, that how do we learn from you and how do you learn from me in order for us to grow, and also in order for us to provide the best service to those that we work with?
That's it. And it's tricky because that language, what's considered appropriate today, that might not be the case tomorrow. It's a constantly evolving thing, and we need to make that effort to stay across that stuff, to make sure that we are being inclusive and actually listening, because if you're just telling people what they are or who they are, you're not going to help anybody. We need to hear from the people themselves, and that involves talking to each other, as sectors.
And I think if you're, focusing your service delivery, as client-centred, we talk in mental health about, recovery, and, I use that language myself. But, I'm never going to be recovered from my mental health diagnosis. But, the language that I would, perhaps choose to use nowadays is managing my mental health. So as much and all as I want to promote well-being, whatever recovery looks like to the individual that I'm working with, for me, just using a broader term of, we're all managing our mental health, and that just sort of makes it a more tangible sort of way of, that it's just a work in progress, and whatever the end result for the individual is will be what it will be, but it's unique to the individual.
I'll just add one. Oh, sorry, Brendan, you go first.
No, go, Kathering, that's fine.
I just wanted to add one from the carer experience is that often people get asked, so who's your carer? Who's the person we need to write down? Without actually just ticking, well, who's the people? Who's the person? What's their name? We don't have to be labelled from the get-go, and in fact those labels are often incorrect for different people, ourselves included, which is why you can see on my screen I just put advocate, because carer doesn't completely define who I am and what I do. So I've chosen that label for myself, and people are welcome to say that. I'll take any label often enough, but there'll be times when it's extra sensitive, and particularly for the person I support, using the word carer doesn't apply and shouldn't apply if they don't say it themselves. So I think that's a really important bit that often goes missing.
I just wanted to say that, the conversation really demonstrates the need for these collaborative opportunities. We talk a lot about drift into clinical spaces and clinical language, and it's important to have these spaces where we can collaborate together and talk about language and talk about what people are doing and what works in their workplace and with the people they work with. I find I'm constantly learning when I'm in spaces like this. And I think it's what all our workforces need, is to grow together and to learn from each other.
I think that's spot on, Brendan. I think finding more opportunities like this where we can get together and not only do the co-learning about each other, but I think it's kind of strengthening too. It kind of fills the tank a bit. You get more inspired and enthused by the lived experience movement, and then you're able to kind of go back into the trenches, so to speak, and do the work. I'm just checking here to see any questions. There's a little bit of narrative around stigma and the fact that a lot of people have lived and living experience from a number of perspectives and often don't disclose throughout our sectors because of stigma and discrimination. And what do you see our role in that being?
That's a really tricky one because, when we're looking at the living experience perspective, what we're doing is still illegal. So that can be a tricky one. And once you put it out there, that, hey, I use drugs, or hey, I used to use drugs, or hey, I've got this mental health condition, or hey, I'm a family carer. And once you put that out, you can't get it back. So, you need to be really discerning on what kind of things you put out to whom, and, the context, don't want to overshare and put something out there that you shouldn't. And we'd love it if it was a space that it was safe at all times to do that. But unfortunately, in the world, it's not. I know a lot of living experience peers who will sort of really look at individual situations and think, okay, I'm not actually going to say that I'm living experience today. I'm just going to, I might say that I'm a peer, or I might not even do that because I'm just not going to feel safe doing that. There might be disrespect as well coming from other disciplines, academia, that kind of thing. So we really need to negotiate that stuff within ourselves. But on the same point, we need to be proud and out there and say, hey, I'm a peer, but it's about negotiating that safety and, that whether it's actually beneficial to do so in the moment, because you can't get it back. But, we do need to, amongst ourselves, create those safe spaces so then they, translate outwards.
And as someone who lives in a, regional city such as Ballarat, and who's, done a bit of media, I can just say I've never had, anyone speak negative to me, in the street or, in the supermarket or whatever. So, I'm not saying that, having a public profile is for everybody, and people can sort of choose to identify how they choose to and, where they choose to disclose. But, I think that, time times are certainly changing, and it's becoming more acceptable, to have the discussions around mental health and AOD. And I think that's what we're really just saying, that it's okay to put your hand up, and if you need assistance to be able to talk about it in whatever domain that looks like. And that's why we do what we do, to break down the stigma and the barriers.
Absolutely. I think our time has come to wrap up the panel. There's so much more I wanted to speak to that's in the chat, but I think anyone that's put anything in the chat, please reach out to SHARC, APSU, Peer Projects, Harm Reduction Victoria, and any contacts we have in the mental health sector. I'll hand it back to Matt.
Thanks, Crystal, and of course Amelia, Catherine, Brendan, and Rick. And I know I've left someone off there now. Rick and Brendan. How could I forget Brendan? Very deeply reluctant to bring that to a close. I think, that if today's show, I think there's just such a rich vein of discussion points for us to continue outside of this forum, and that certainly demonstrated that as well. And as I said before, we will look to hopefully have ways where we can continue some of these conversations. Because they all matter. So thanks. That was really great. Lots of interesting information and probably more questions than answers, for me at least. But that's part of the point, right?